Alrighty, so we've made it to week 3 of the NFL season already. It's kind of crazy how fast it is flying by. For you today, I have my QB and tight end tiers and rankings for week 3. With that being said, we're going to hop right into my QB tiers and rankings right now. So at number 1 on my list, I have Lamar Jackson going up against the Detroit Lions. There is a super high implied scoring total for the Baltimore Ravens in week 3. I think Lamar is going to be in a fun spot where it should be a very high scoring game. I'm hoping that this is more of an offensive battle and not so much of a defensive battle. The biggest concern that I have is Baltimore's run defense has been pretty good so far this season. So with that, there is an opportunity for the Lions run offense to kind of get shut down. If that happens, it makes them very one-dimensional. That could make it where Jared Goff pops off and the passing game overall pops off for the Lions in week 3, but it could also set up the Ravens to really just know what's going to be coming. It's going to be having to pass the football, especially if they get off to an early lead. So for Lamar Jackson and the QB number 2, which is Josh Allen, who's going up against the Miami Dolphins this week, they're pretty much top 5 guys every single week. It's just a matter of what order I feel like putting them in and who I feel a little bit more strongly about. Same thing for the Bills. It's a really high implied scoring game for them against the Dolphins. Pretty much horrible defense. Hopefully for this game, like the Ravens game, Tua is able to play up to a decent level, so it makes it a higher scoring, more competitive game. If that's not the case, if the Bills defense can kind of keep them a little bit too much in check, it could kind of wind up like week 2. So I do have Lamar over him because I think it'll be a little bit more of a competitive game no matter what against the Lions. But either way, again, you have Lamar, you have Josh. They're pretty much going to be up here every single week. I really don't feel the need to justify it. At QB3, I have Jalen Hurts going up against the Los Angeles Rams. I do think this is a matchup where you see Jalen running the ball, but also having to pass the ball. If the Rams offense can get going, which is kind of what I'm expecting, especially with the addition of Davante Adams, this matchup that we saw last year in the playoffs should be even more explosive than what we saw last year in the playoffs. With that being said, I think that Jalen's going to have to throw the ball a lot more. I just think it has a potential to be a very high scoring game. I know both of these teams have very good defenses, but I think that their offenses are just going to have to explode this week. I just think that Jalen's in a pretty good spot this week. At number 4, I have Dak Prescott. This is the highest I've had him, and maybe the highest I have him the entire season. Super high implied scoring totals for both teams between them and the Bears in week 3. We've kind of seen it through 2 weeks that Javonte Williams in the run game is doing pretty good, I guess, to decent. I just think this is going to be a very high scoring game. The Bears defense is going to be missing some critical key players on the defense side of the football. I just feel like Ben Johnson is going to throw everything he has into this game. I'm assuming Caleb Williams is going to feel a little bit of pressure to kind of pop off and show that he can get it done in the NFL. So not only from the implied point totals for this game do I think it's going to be a high scoring game, but also just both of these defenses haven't looked very good at stopping the pass. Obviously, the run offense for the Bears isn't really clicking that well so far with DeAndre Swift. So I think you're just going to see a lot of Dak, a lot of Caleb throwing the ball. There should be quite a few touchdowns in this game, obviously, as well. I just feel like, based on everything from Vegas and based on what I've seen from these defenses so far through 2 weeks, that Dak should be in a pretty good smash spot this week. At QB number 5, and it's the highest I've had him so far as well, it is going to be Patrick Mahomes. They're going up against the New York Giants this week. It is very high implied scoring totals for the Chiefs in week 3. The Giants defense is pretty booty so far. They're not able to stop the run, but Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt really haven't got it going. They may look a little decent in this week, but I think that the passing game for the Chiefs is really going to pop off. I know they don't have like a litany of elite receivers, so Patrick Mahomes, whether he's running the football, passing the football, should have a decent amount of touchdown equity this week for the Kansas City Chiefs. It should be one of those games where it ends up being Russell Wilson having to throw the deep ball, lots of passes from them. If you know me from what I've talked about before going into the season, I wasn't that high on Patrick Mahomes. So for me to have him this high, I'm pretty confident that he is somebody that is really good to start in week 3. I really didn't want to do it, but here we are. It is none other than Daniel Jones. He's going up against the Tennessee Titans this week. My only concern is the Titans have not scored a lot of points. I believe right now they are ranked 30th in points scored per game, like 14.5 or something like that. So it may not be a very high scoring game from the Titans perspective, but I still think Daniel Jones is going to be able to get it done. Probably get another rushing touchdown, 1 passing touchdown, 2 passing touchdowns. It should be a pretty good game for him against the Titans defense that's not looked very good through the first couple of weeks. Again, Daniel Jones, somebody that you're probably going to have to start with all the injuries that are out there. So I would feel pretty comfortable against the Titans. Lackluster defense starting him in week 3, which is why I have him at QB6. QB7, I have Justin Herbert going up against the Denver Broncos. This really isn't going to be like the highest of scoring games in week 3. The Broncos defense has looked kind of so far through 2 weeks. So I'm assuming Sean Payton will get a little bit more figured out in week 3. But when it comes to the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, they are passing the ball a lot. They are passing the ball a lot in neutral pass situations. They are passing the ball when they're up. They're having Justin Herbert run all over the field. I feel like Justin Herbert's kind of locked in as a QB1 as long as the pass volume stays the same for the Chargers going throughout the rest of the season. It is an interdivisional rivalry game between the Chargers and the Broncos, so I'm assuming Harbaugh and Herbert are going to go out there with a good game plan and ball out in week 3, which is why I have Herbert pretty comfortably for me as a top 12 starting quarterback in week 3. So at QB8, I have Baker Mayfield. So the biggest issue I have for Baker in week 3 is kind of the same issue I have with Josh Allen. If we don't see Justin Fields play, which I don't think we're going to, I don't think he's going to clear concussion protocol. It means Tyrod Taylor is going to be out there. The Bucks have not allowed you to run the football, so Breece Hall should not really be able to get it going. So if they're not able to run the ball effectively and Tyrod Taylor is kind of like, a step down as far as explosiveness for this offense, it could be a lower scoring game. I still think that you're going to see Baker out there throwing the ball, running the football. Who knows, he might even have a rushing touchdown this week. I just don't really know what we're going to see as far as scoring goes. I do feel comfortable with Baker. He is somebody you're going to be starting every single week. At QB9, and this really comes down to if he's going to play, and I have him this low because even if he does play, I don't know how effective he is going to be with his legs, and that is Jayden Daniels. The two big things to keep in mind for the Raiders, they haven't scored a lot of points the first 2 weeks. The other big thing is they're not letting you run the football effectively, so I think that is going to kind of make this team a little bit more one-dimensional. But with him not being 100% healthy and with him potentially not playing this week, I wanted to have him this low just in case, again, like I said, he doesn't play, or even if he does, it might not be as effective. And I do also believe that it's kind of hard to rank him not as a top 12 QB any given week. So I have him semi-comfortably around QB9. So at QB number 10, a little bit higher than I've had him in previous weeks. And no, it's not an overreaction from week 2. It is going to be Jared Goff. The Lions are playing the Ravens. I already kind of talked about the matchup with Lamar Jackson. It should be a pretty high-scoring game. If the run game does get shut down, he may not be quite as effective and he might not score quite as many points. But with the implied team totals for this week, it's pretty hard not to say that Jared Goff is going to be a QB1 in week 3. And realistically, this should be a game for both the Ravens and the Lions that they kind of see as like a potential Super Bowl matchup. You're seeing the Ravens score a lot, means Jared Goff's going to have to pass the ball a lot. So I just think that there's a real chance where he finishes even higher than this, but I want to make sure he's in my top 12 guys so that you feel comfortable starting him in week 3. At QB 11, I have Matthew Stafford going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. This is the highest I've had Matt on the year so far. I feel like this matchup could be the NFC Championship preview that we're going to see towards the end of the season. I think you're going to see Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford see it just as such. I think you're going to see Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams pop off, and I think you're also going to see Kyron Williams have a pretty good game like he did last year in the playoffs as well. I'm really predicting for this week that you're really going to see both of these teams bring everything they have on all facets of their offenses. Their defenses could kind of hinder the total scoring for this game, but Matt Stafford has looked good through the first 2 weeks. This will be his first real test against a good offense and a really good defense. This game could really pop off for both offenses, and it could be like a crazy high-scoring game that people probably aren't expecting, but I have Matt Stafford comfortably within inside of my QB1 range. So if you are in a 12-man league, I believe he's definitely worth starting if you have him in week 3. QB12, I have Caleb Williams going up against the Dallas Cowboys in week 3. It is going to be a very, very high-scoring game. You are going to see Dak Prescott throwing the ball. You're going to see Caleb Williams throwing the ball. The run offense for the Bears so far through the first 2 weeks has not looked very good. If Dak and the Cowboys get out to an early lead, it is going to put a lot of pressure on Caleb Williams to have to pass the ball down the field and score some points. I said it earlier for the Dak portion. I do think you're going to see Ben Johnson throw everything he has literally in his mind into this game because he does not want to start 0-3. Caleb Williams should come out, look pretty good. The implied team scoring for the Bears in week 3 is relatively high. I want to say it's the top 5 or top 6 projected scoring offense for this coming week. This should set it up where Caleb Williams is able to go out there, pass the ball, run the ball, score a lot of points. This pass defense for the Cowboys hasn't looked very good. We just saw them get tore up by Russell Wilson and Malik Neighbors, and worst of all, Wan'Dale Robinson in week 2. I don't think they're going to be able to make enough changes. There's too many pass catchers for Caleb Williams and this offense for the Bears. This could ultimately be way too low of a ranking for me for Caleb Williams, but I do still have him inside of a QB1 range for expected outcomes in week 3. So again, if you're in a 12-man league, I think he's worth starting for this coming week. At QB 13, I have Drake May going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. I'm really hoping that in week 3 we see a peak Drake May. The run defense for the Steelers has looked pretty bad, so he may not have to pass quite as much. But if he takes off to run, who knows what could end up happening. I just feel like holistically, the Steelers defense is not playing very good as a whole. Their secondary hasn't looked very elite either. We've kind of seen them get torn up 2 weeks in a row by quarterbacks who really, I don't feel like are the strongest passers in Justin Fields and Sam Darnold. So if you don't have access to some of these other QBs out there, but you do have Drake May and you're in a 12-man league, I would feel pretty comfortable starting him for this matchup this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So at QB 14, I have Russell Wilson. I really didn't want to rank him. I didn't want to have him this high. He looked pretty good in week 2 against the Dallas Cowboys secondary that just was getting torched by Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, and he looked a lot better than he did in week 1. He looked a lot better than pretty much any game I saw him play last season. It could be that he has a couple pass catchers out there that are better than what he had when he played with Pittsburgh last year. I do think that Patrick Mahomes, like I said, is going to be able to pop off against this Giants defense. I think they're going to be able to score a lot more points than people are probably expecting out there. So if that ends up happening, we see Patrick Mahomes popping off, them scoring points. The Giants defense can't stop the run, can't stop the pass, so they're going to get scored on quite a bit in week 3. Russell Wilson is going to have to pass the ball a lot. The Chiefs don't let you run the ball effectively against them, so they're going to have to pass. I don't know if their secondary is going to match up very well against Malik Neighbors, even Wan'Dale to a certain extent. That could set it up where Russell Wilson is somebody who really is worth starting in week 3. My last QB for you guys at QB 15 is Jordan Love going up against the Cleveland Browns. So far, the Cleveland Browns defense is pretty good. I don't really care what anybody says or how they feel about it. The biggest issue is their offense cannot sustain drives. Their offense cannot score. It shouldn't be a very high scoring game, so I don't think that Jordan Love's going to have to pop off. Maybe it's a little bit more high scoring for the Packers in week 3. I don't feel like they're really asking Jordan Love to do any more than like he really has to do through the first 2 weeks. This could set it up where the Browns can't score against a good Packers defense. Jordan Love doesn't really have to go out there and be Superman, because if the Browns are only able to score 14 points, that means the Packers only have to score 17 points or 20 points or 21 points. It doesn't really have to be a high scoring game for him. I do think he is somebody who probably is going to underwhelm if people have him higher up in their rankings, because I just don't think it's going to be a high scoring game for them against the Browns in week 3, but it's also harder to have him lower because of how well he has looked through the first 2 weeks. All right, so there are my QB rankings and tiers. From here, I'm going to hop right over into my tight end rankings and tiers. All right, so at tight end 1, I do have Trey McBride going up against the San Francisco 49ers. I do think this will be a decently high scoring game for Trey McBride, and then for the tight end number 2 that I have is Brock Bowers. I'm going to have pretty much these guys at tight end 1, tight end 2, tight end 3 throughout the entire season. It's really kind of no mystery. I don't feel like I need to explain to you why they're the top 2 tight ends. At this point in time, we should know. I do think Brock Bowers' performance in week 2 is a little underwhelming. Hopefully they get him more involved in week 3. But for both of these guys, top 2 tight ends in week 3. At tight end 3, I do have Sam Laporta. He is going up against the Baltimore Ravens this week. It is going to be a relatively high scoring game, which is why I have him this high. His usage hasn't been anything too crazy so far, but I do anticipate with it being a higher scoring game this week, with the fact that it should be a pretty pass heavy game from the Lions because of the fact that the Ravens are going to score a lot of points no matter what. That does set it up where we see Sam Laporta be involved. He may have some touchdown equity this week as well, depending on how the matchups shake out between him and the other wide receivers against the corners and safeties from the Ravens. Again, these top 3 guys are pretty self-explanatory. I feel like pretty much the majority of tight ends are pretty self-explanatory at this point in time, but I will still kind of break down my thoughts and my tiers and rankings for them. At tight end 4, I do have Tyler Warren. The Colts are going up against the Titans. Shouldn't be a super high scoring game, but he has been overly involved every single week. He has crazy upside on this team, crazy upside on the season. He realistically could finish as a top 3 or top 4 tight end as long as we see Danny Dimes keep on clicking like he has so far through the first few weeks. I think he's pretty much locked in as a top 5 guy until we see different out of Daniel Jones at some point in time during the season, if we see it at all. I have Tucker Kraft. With the scoring profile for this game against the Browns, I could have bumped him down. I just feel like he has so much opportunity on this team, especially with Jayden Reed going down now. It wouldn't surprise me if he is the leading target earner for the Packers in week 3 against the Browns because of Jayden Reed not being there. He could end up being number 2 behind one of the other wide receivers, but he just has so much target equity on this team. Jordan Love's his quarterback. He has touchdown equity on this team. Like, he is just set up to be a smash guy going forward. At tight end 5, and I never thought that I would get this far. It's kind of like Daniel Jones with the QB rankings and tiers. It is Juwan Johnson. I just don't like the tape. I just don't like it, but he has like so much of a target equity on this team right now. He is like the safety blanket for Spencer Rattler. Juwan Johnson is going to be here until we kind of see either Spencer Rattler fall off, or we see Spencer Rattler more comfortable targeting Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, and they're scoring more points with those more explosive options. But until then, Juwan Johnson, probably a top 12 tight end every single week until things change for the Saints, if they ever do. At tight end 7, I have Travis Kelce. Like I already said earlier, for Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson, this should be a pretty high-scoring game. I think the ball is going to be passed a lot. The Giants can't stop the run. They can't stop the pass. Travis Kelce is probably going to emerge as the top target earner for Patrick Mahomes in week 3. Even if he doesn't look very explosive, he's going to get a lot of targets, and the defense and secondary for the Giants is not very good. Their front four is good, but aside from that, it's not very good. So I think you see Travis Kelce have a pretty good game this week and probably overperform what his expectations are in week 3. At tight end 8, I have Jake Ferguson. The Cowboys are going up against the Bears this week. It is one of the highest implied scoring games on the week. It should set it up where Dak is having to pass the ball a lot. Their secondary has not looked very good against the pass, so Caleb should be able to get it going in week 3 pretty effectively. Hopefully Ben Johnson has him kind of like more pushed inside the box and it looks a little bit more explosive. If this game ends up being pretty high scoring, Jake Ferguson is going to be overly involved in the passing game for the Cowboys, and he just has a lot of target equity on this football team as the second or third target earner behind CeeDee Lamb. He may end up finishing more as like tight end 5 or tight end 4. We'll have to see what ends up happening, but I have him comfortably inside my starting tight ends, even in 12-man leagues in week 3. At tight end 9, I have Kyle Pitts. It may be a little bit higher than I probably should have him, only because the Panthers are kind of a run funnel right now. Bijan, Tyler Algier will probably pop off. I do feel like he is due for some targets like he's gotten in week 1 and week 2. Maybe he scores a touchdown. It's kind of what you're hoping for with him at this point in time. This could end up being a higher scoring game than is projected. Bryce Young didn't look great in week 2, but he did pass for a bajillion yards. So if they're able to actually convert some of those passes and receptions into touchdowns more effectively this week, it could be a higher scoring game. If that's what we see, yes, Bijan, Tyler Algier are going to get it going, but it should set it up where Michael Penix still has to throw the football a few times. And so far through the first 2 weeks of the season, he is getting the ball to Kyle Pitts on a pretty consistent basis. At tight end 10, and I have him at tight end 10, depending on if Jayden Daniels plays, it is Zach Ertz. If Jayden Daniels plays, Zach Ertz is set up to be a tight end 1 pretty much every single week that he plays. He might only be tight end 10 or 11 or 12, but again, if you're in a 12-man league or a 10-man league, he's definitely somebody worth starting. If Jayden does not play, I do not know what we're going to get out of Marcus Mariota. It would be his first start in forever. So if that ends up happening, I would not have him inside my top 12, which is why I have 2 more guys after him to kind of fill in if Jayden Daniels does not end up playing this week. At tight end 11, I have Harold Fannin. He's getting the targets. It's just the fact that the Browns cannot score the football. They cannot get into the red zone. They cannot sustain drives. This probably is not going to be a high-scoring game because they're going up against a good Packers defense. If he ends up being the check down guy for Joe Flacco again in week 3, like he is in week 1 and was in week 2, it should set him up where he's a fringe tight end 1 in week 3. Tight end 12, I have Dalton Kincaid. He's attached to Josh Allen. Bills are going to be a top 5 scoring offense throughout the entire season. There's a reality where this could be a higher scoring game with the Dolphins. Pass game looking better in week 2 than it did in week 1. If that ends up being the case, Dalton Kincaid has decent target equity on this football team. He should have some touchdown equity possibly this week, especially if it is a higher scoring game. It does put him as more of like a fringe tight end 1 for me. But when you get later in the tight end rankings and tiers, there's a lot of like yucky, gross guys and matchups. What that ends up meaning is I do have him inside of my tight end 1s in 12-man leagues for week 3. Again, if Jayden Daniels does not play, you can bump Harold Fannin up 1 spot, Dalton Kincaid up 1 spot, and then this would be the guy who would be tight end 12, I guess, on the week for me, as long as he does play, and that is Dallas Goedert. In week 1, he was a safety blanket for Jalen Hurts. They were not good quality targets, but for the tight end, especially in 12-man leagues, you're just looking for people who are going to get targets and maybe could score a touchdown. You're kind of hoping for that. And with that, there are my QB and tight end rankings and tiers for week 3. Hopefully, this video helps you get us a little bit closer to winning your fantasy football championship in 2025. I know the waiver wire has already passed. This week, I did make the effort to try and include more players for deeper leagues. I kind of got a rude awakening from a friend of mine who's in a crazy deep league. So I tried to include some more players that you potentially could stash on your bench. Hopefully, there is still some people on there that are available even in your deeper leagues. In your shallower leagues, I still feel like there are some people on there that are worth rostering and stashing on your bench and seeing how they look in week 3. Hopefully, I'll see you guys again. No. Hopefully you guys will see me again real soon. And until then, y'all have a blessed day.